Hey, I'm James from Smoking Dad Barbecue, and I love great barbecue. And one of the things that has been challenging me over the last couple of years is how to take amazing results like I get on my offset smokers and recreate them on a ceramic Kamado. And I've done numerous different tests, but never before have I shown how to do it on a Big Green Egg. So if you happen to be following along with a Big Green Egg, I'm gonna show you how to turn out the brisket of your life on a Big Green Egg using my signature double indirect method. Let's get into it. So if you've been following along for years and you already know everything there is to know about double indirect, I put chapters down below so you can just skip right to the different chapters about how to set up double indirect in a Big Green Egg. But if this is a little bit foreign to you and you're saying, James, what is double indirect? I want to give you a crash course on everything you need to know that's led us to this point, including 3 golden rules for any brand ceramic Kamado cooker. These apply to everything that I've used them on, from Kamado Joe to Big Green Egg to Primo to off brands at big box stores. I've tried them all, and these are the 3 rules that over the last 15 years I have tried and tested over and over again, and I wish I knew these years ago, as it would have saved me countless hours of headache and frustration. So
ain't nobody got time for that.
So the first one is low and slow versus hot and fast. When I did my first brisket on a Big Green Egg just over 15 years ago, there wasn't what we're watching right now, YouTube. It wasn't even a company. So I had to rely on this ancient technology called books, if you can believe it or not. And in there, I would find advice like smoke your brisket at 225 degrees Fahrenheit, which if you're cooking on an offset smoker can be a fantastic temperature. But trying to adapt good advice for an offset to a ceramic Kamado, more often than not, is a recipe for a disaster versus the blueprint for success. And through trial and error, mostly error, I learned the hard way that trying to run a Big Green Egg at 225 initially can be difficult for fire management. So if you go to bed, maybe your fires spike up, or even worse, the temperatures come crashing down and you're jarred awake to the sounds of your meat thermometer, letting you know, usually around 3 in the morning, that you've got to come back and nurse your fire back to life. And when I did a side-by-side test, it confirmed what I thought we already knew, which is hotter and faster fires, they taste way better. So not only is it easier to run a ceramic Kamado in the 250, 270, or 300 degree range than it is around 200 to 220, the results are infinitely better. But there's a catch. Anytime that we're cooking on a grill where the fire sits underneath of our food, this introduces a problem. Usually on a long, slow cook, something like we're cooking today, a brisket, this can mean we're getting leathery bottoms. So we go to slice it, we get some tearing and we lose some of our bark. So this solves one problem and creates a whole new issue. The second rule that I've learned is also not crossing swim lanes with good advice for an offset smoker to a Kamado style smoker. As for example, good smoke, bad smoke, clean smoke, dirty smoke, these can mean wildly different things depending on the type of grill that you're cooking on. So using my Smoke North Echo offset as an example, I can show you an example here of dirty smoke, which is what I would use if I want to get a ton of smoke flavor. But despite the name dirty smoke, I can see visible flames flickering along the entire time. And so even though the top damper is practically closed and I'm getting a ton of smoke, the chamber of my offset is large enough that there's enough room for that smoke to dissipate and not choke out my fire. This is not true in a ceramic style Kamado. So if we were doing dirty smoke with our vents barely open, this is not giving us the same dirty smoke that I'm able to achieve on my offset. More often than not, what we're getting is creosote, and creosote does not taste like good smoke. Earlier this year, I had a chance to join a competition barbecue team at Memphis in May and tasted some award-winning barbecue. And much like I've been able to do side-by-sides tasting on my offset, creosote does not win a spot at any barbecue competition. And if this has become what your palate is accustomed to, I want to assure you, there is a better way with smoke. Smoke is like a seasoning with salt. You can have too much, you can have too little, but when it's done right, it penetrates all the way through whatever we're cooking, and it gives us a sweet, distinct flavor, not a gross analogy that I've used before, like licking an ashtray. If that's what your smoke profile tastes like, we are going to solve that problem for you today, and I promise you'll never want to go back once you taste the way that smoke can and should taste like on a ceramic Kamado. And the last rule, double indirect It's a better way. No manufacturer has yet come to market with double indirect out of the box, but I've done countless experiments myself, as well as partnered with one of the nation's top engineering firms who is still doing some ongoing CFD studies. And their early results confirm what I already know, that double indirect in a Kamado style grill where we have our heat below our food is a better way. And so the crash course here on double indirect is we have a heat deflector sitting below another heat deflector with an air gap. And on average, doing this takes over 200 degrees Fahrenheit of surface temperature out of the top stone, which is normally what would be causing a problem for something like our brisket to become leathery and tear. So not only does this solve a problem about saving the bottom of our brisket, it also encourages a cleaner, hotter fire, and it uses way more fuel. You heard the saying, fuel is flavor. That has never been more apparent than when running a double indirect fire. We can burn through nearly an entire basket of charcoal, all the smoking wood that we add in the basket, and as an added bonus, we can burn through wood that we add underneath where the ash and embers normally fall and collect in something like my kick ash can. All of this combines together to give us the best smoke profile I've ever had on any ceramic Kamado. And today, if you've got a Big Green Egg, it's your turn to learn how to turn out the brisket of your life. So I'm gonna break today's brisket down into 3 steps. So first, we're gonna do the cold smoke, the hot smoke, and then the rest getting ready to prepare our brisket. So starting with the cold smoke, this is pretty straightforward. All I'm gonna do is remove all the internal components out of my Big Green Egg so I can drop down a pellet tube smoker. You can find these on Amazon for a couple bucks, your local barbecue store. I think mine was about $14. There's not really a quality difference that I've been able to find out here. So if you find one on the cheap and cheerful, that is the one for you. From a sizing perspective, I have a 6-inch tube, which is more than enough for the 1 to 2 hours that I like to do cold smoking for. I say 1 to 2 hours because on things like pork, shoulders, and or ribs, there's a food safety concern. If we start to go into the 3 to 4 hour mark and the pork warms up, we can get into a bit of a bad bacteria. So I like to keep my cold smokes in and around 90 minutes is a great window for everything. You'll be safe from pork to brisket as we transition from cold smoke right into hot smoke. So it's a continuous progression of gaining heat in whatever we're cooking. Important to note when you're cold smoking, you want your bottom vent and your top vent open all the way. And I always like to put in my deflectors to make sure that, again, we're not getting any residual heat from that fire coming up and starting to cook a small circle, if you will, in the bottom of our brisket. So we are not cooking, we are cold smoking, and I'm just gonna let this run for about 90 minutes. When the 90 minutes is up, we can get our brisket off, set it aside, and start to transition to our hot smokes. This is where we want to get some supplemental wood smoke from actual wood splits burning versus wood pellets. And this makes a big difference, by the way. I put a resource together earlier in the year. I have a link to it down below, but it's my Kamado smoking wood guide. Not all wood is created equal. Using a wood moisture meter, for example, I've tested pellets that have been in 3 to 5% in the relative wood humidity. Some of the store-bought chunks at big box stores, they're kiln dried. And while this burns nice and quick and easy, they are just in that 3 to 5% range as well. And this, in wood smoking snob terms, is the equivalent of throwing some newspaper in your grill. We're not going to get a ton of flavor from kiln-dried wood. And if your mind is going where mine went 15 years ago, well, I'll solve that by just soaking my wood chunks or my chips. Again, using that same wood moisture meter, something I elaborate on a little bit more in my guide, is even after 4 hours of submerging hardwood underwater, it doesn't change the relative wood humidity. All we do is get a little bit of surface moisture that's going to steam, and then once that wood combusts and we've burnt off the outside moisture, it burns exactly the same as what it would have if we didn't do that. So that's not actually a way to improve our smoke. The secret to better smoke is getting wood with a hydration range in and around that 10 to 20% range. Gives me the best results inside of a Kamado style grill. And so the way that I like to set up for my smoke is in stages. We've already done stage 1, which is our cold smoke. That's using a pellet tube smoker. The second stage is going to be any smoking wood that we place on top of our fire right after we lit it. And this can be a little bit dicey. Let me explain. So if our grill was completely heat soaked, deflectors were completely heat soaked, or your plate setter or your half moons like I'm using in my expander setup, this can cause problems when we immediately dial down the vent and we have a fresh piece of wood sitting in our fire, is that will smolder and that will give us the creosote. The antidote to this problem is to add this piece of smoking wood when we are still not completely heat soaked. So even though I have my deflectors for the double indirect partially open and they're gaining some heat, my primary deflectors as well as the cooking grids and the brisket itself, let alone the dome, is not completely heat soaked. And so for this second stage, our bottom vent is still all the way open and our top vent is all the way open, and we get everything on, including our brisket. This is going to give us about 30 minutes of good smoke while everything is still coming up to temperature. By the time we do get completely up to temperature and that wood is long gone, we're gonna move into our third stage of smoking wood, which is the wood chunks that we place underneath of our charcoal. And these will activate in and around about an hour when the coal starts to burn down, causes some of them to smolder. That smoldering wood passes through an actual charcoal filter before it comes up into flavoring whatever it is we're cooking, like today's brisket, and gives us a great result. That is a Harry Sue black belt tip, somebody I had a chance of meeting and talking to in more detail at Memphis in May earlier this year. He is a world-class individual, and that was a tip he shared years ago, and I have never gone back in terms of placing smoking wood underneath, with this small exception of how to do it in a ceramic Kamado before everything is heat soaked. The fourth and final layer of smoke is using a hack I discovered a few years ago, which is using our ash drawer to load in other wood. On my offset style smokers, I can play with the wood anywhere between 15 to 30 fires is what I'm building, depending on the duration of what it is that I'm cooking. So if my wood is too wet, I can place it on the firebox and dry it out. If it's already nice and dry and close to that 10%, I can just get to business and throw it directly in the fire. But that's 15 to 30 times that I can make small little adjustments that's going to improve the smoke on my brisket. In a ceramic smoker, typically when you build your fire and you put your deflector plates in, you put your brisket on, that's it. You're one and done. That single interaction and decision that you make around how you're gonna smoke is going to inform the entire duration of your cook and the end result. That's before I developed a modification for the first 3 steps, and finally my 4th step, which is adding supplemental wood smoke down below. The caveat here, for this to work, we need to be running a double indirect setup. The fire doesn't get forced to work hot enough outside of a double indirect setup unless you're going for much hotter temperatures. And you also need something like what I'm using. I have a kick ash basket and a kick ash can installed in my Big Green Egg and all my other Kamados. That is the secret sauce from a tools perspective in order to allow those hot coals and embers to fall down into our ash can and cause that wood to combust and give us supplemental smoke. And that means no matter how long this brisket is on the grill, I'll be able to add the smoke flavor that I need all day long without having to open up everything and try and interact with the fire that is way below all of my grids, deflectors, as well as the brisket at the bottom of my Big Green Egg. The brisket prep, I'm sticking with Cooper from Bar A Barbecue to keep things simple. I've done this recipe on a few other things and it's been awesome. It's very similar to my Ultimate Texas SPG rub, but since I'm doing a same day brisket, I'm gonna go for what Cooper uses here, which is Fiesta Seasoned It All Salt, along with a heavy base of fresh ground black pepper. I like using my pepper cannon for fresh pepper. If you are a coffee aficionado like myself, you know the difference that fresh ground coffee versus coffee that was ground and sat in your cupboard for a year does not taste the same. Pepper is a spice, and grinding it right before we apply it gives you a whole extra layer of flavor if you've never tried anything other than the pre-ground meshed peppers. That's my one deviation to Cooper's recipe. So to get started, first thing this morning before we started the cold smoke, I got my knife out. I did a quick trim on the brisket. I put everything into a foil pan, including some of the meat and fat that I'll use for burger grind as well as sausage grind, but I later separated that a little bit further here just so I have some of the larger white fat pieces left, since what I'm going to do is actually smoke some tallow from the brisket that I have left over. In future cooks, I'll either inject this to the flat of a brisket that needs a little help being upgraded from choice to prime, and or I'll use the tallow when we put it in the bottom of the foil wrap if we're doing a long hot hold, and there are a whole bunch of other things you can do with tallow. But why not take advantage of the fat that we paid for when we bought this from the butcher or your local store. So that's exactly what my game plan is for today. I applied the pepper first, then the seasonal. This is exactly what Cooper said to do, is the salt finds its way through the opening gaps much better than pepper does if we do it the other way around. And if I had a plan to do this cook way more in advance, this would be a good thing to do for an overnight dry brine. That will just give time for the salt to work its way all the way down into our brisket. But since James was a bad YouTuber today, I'm getting it on the grill directly after seasoning it for our cold smoke. My game plan from there is just to let it sit for about 2 hours. I installed a meter probe so that I can be tracking along the cook, and I've gone for a horizontal alignment, which is going to give me a little bit more of the grate temperatures versus the dome temperatures. If you want the dome temperature, you would just flip the probe so it's more vertical. But since I'm going to have the top of my egg expander rack in, and that's where I'm going to place the foil pan to smoke some of my fat trimmings to make my own tallow, I didn't want it to interfere and give me any sort of wonky readings by touching the cooking grids and or the foil pan above. I'm going to let it ride for 2 hours before looking for the first time, and then I'm going to spray it with a 50-50 mixture of apple cider vinegar and water just to make sure that I don't get any burning on the edge pieces. We'll take a look depending on how it's looking later on if we need to move to the foil boat. I want to let the top side of the brisket, and that is a point I will mention. For me, the top side is the fat side up. I know, you're saying, James, that's another thing that I read 20 years ago, where if you're cooking in an offset, you want the fat facing the heat. So in a Kamado, you should have the fat facing the fire. This is true, but you are losing a world of flavor. If you ever go to a great Texas barbecue restaurant and you taste their brisket versus yours, it does not taste the same. If you have the fat on the bottom and you lose all of it to the board versus getting that caramelized, candy-like fat texture that we get if we're able to render the fat cap on top. And I've done a side-by-side, and I'm also, again, that's another no going back, fat cap up. Tastes better. The only caveat here is we need to run a clean enough and hot enough fire for it actually to render, and we may need to protect the bottom with a foil boat. So that's a decision that we'll make around 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will allow the top of our brisket to continue to develop bark all the way up to the point we are ready to rest it. For our rest, I'm going to wrap it in foil, use some previously smoked tallow that I've already prepared on the bottom of my foil pan, let it rest down to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll be ready to rejoin you later on for the taste test. So while I may have to wait for hours before I'm tasting some delicious brisket, for you, the wait's going to go by just like this. Well, the wait is over. Time though to see if it actually tastes amazing. Come nice and close, we'll find out together. So the bark looks amazing. More importantly to me though, it feels amazing. It's got that squishy jelly feel. I can't wait. Let's go for our cross section and we'll get some slices out of the point and our flat. So first thing I'll be looking for is make sure there's no tearing, which we don't have any. Next, I don't want to squeeze all the juices out, but make sure we've got all that fat rendered. That looks absolutely incredible. Nice smoke ring, nice bark. So far, so good. Let's get a couple slices from our flat. So flat's holding up under its own weight. Bend right over the finger. Floppy, floppy. And even as I flop, it just starts to fall apart. So I think that is right on the money for tenderness. Again, great smoke ring, juicy in our flat. I think this is a good sign. Let's get a couple slices out of our point. Looks also incredible. Get a couple sample slices to try here. Once again, incredibly tender, fold over the finger, flap, and if I flap, same thing as the flat on the third try, just falls apart. That looks amazing. Let's dive in for our taste test. Starting with our flat, cheers. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm not gonna make you wait. This is a winning brisket. So much going on. We'll come back to that but not before I try the point in. Cheers. Wow. Lights out. I think it comes through clear on the screen, but in case you can't tell, this is an awesome brisket. And I'm judging awesome by a couple things. First, our bark is fantastic. We're getting that signature Texas look on a ceramic Kamado. Next, the seasoning is on point. The salt and pepper have come together to make a really flavorful bark. But the smoke, this is what I think you are here for, and what I started my quest to improve ceramic Kamado's ability to turn out things like brisket. The smoke is where it's at for a Kamado. Now I show you some of the side-by-side between a non-double indirect setup versus a double indirect setup. You can see in my Filer IR camera the differences in some of the heat signature, but what really matters for this brisket is the reduction in heat of the ceramic stone sitting right below it. So if I show you what the stone temperature is on a regular indirect using the Expander system, we are up in the 500 degree Fahrenheit range on the stone sitting directly below our food. If I go a step further and remove that, you can get a sense of what a fire looks like inside of your Big Green Egg at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. There's not a lot of coals activated in order to maintain 300 degrees Fahrenheit in a very energy efficient grill. This is where double indirect does its magic. So if I contrast the before and after, if you look at not only the infrared camera, but the surface reduction temperature in the stones was well over the 200 degrees that I was hoping to record, which is similar to what I've seen on all other Kamados where I've tested and tried my double indirect setup. And that is exactly what we're getting in the Big Green Egg. And as promised, that results in a much larger fire. So if you compare before and after at the same 300 degrees Fahrenheit, it is easily 2 to 3 times more charcoal burning to give us that great smoke flavor that I just enjoyed. And I burnt through nearly an entire basket when the egg was cooled down. I took a look to see where we were at. Nearly the whole basket was gone, and all the smoking pieces that I added initially as well as throughout the cook had been burned in my Kickash cans. So I know this brisket has more smoke flavor on it, fuel is flavor, than any other setup that I've tested on any Kamado. So if you've been following along saying, James, I wish you'd show me how to do a double indirect setup on the Big Green Egg with a little assistance from Ceramic Grill Store, adding that spider accessory and my old large egg heat deflector stones, I was able to pull off the perfect double indirect setup. If you're following along on a large, I would downsize that again to the Minimax pizza stone in order to make sure that we're getting good airflow up and around, and you'll still see the same benefits in terms of the reduction in the surface temperature on the stones sitting directly below your food. That's it for today. I'm James from Smoked Dad Barbecue signing off. Remember, don't be afraid to fire it up. Seriously good.